check.
How is it?
Oh, you're good. Okay, you're handling it. All right, we're good.
I'm glad because I wouldn't be able to figure it out. Well, happy Thursday, everyone. Thank you for coming to this fantastic local spending discussion. We have lots of questions. Unfortunately, a very smart panel to help answer all of these very deep dive questions. For those of you I have not had an opportunity to meet, I'm James Quintero. I'm the policy director for the Texas Public Policy Foundation's Taxpayer Protection Project. So as you can probably imagine, I have very strong views on fiscal policy. For those of you online, welcome as well. Looking forward to a great discussion. When we look at the local public finance landscape today, I think it's a fairly challenged one, and I'm speaking from a general perspective, of course. But if you look at Texas generally, what we see is a rather heightened debt environment, elevated spending levels, and I would say a fairly outsized property tax that supports it all. And I'm going to do the typical conservative thing and throw a bunch of numbers at you real fast, but just to help paint the picture on the spending, debt, and tax pieces of this, I want to help make sure that we're all on the same page. And so when you look at local government debt, and this is all debt owed by all units of government, both principal and interest, but when you look at that particular statistic, what you notice is that it's $461 billion, or about $15,500 owed by every man, woman, and child in the Lone Star State. That's a lot of money that we owe. When you look at the spending levels, fortunately we have lots of local government spending documents online, and most of it shows that spending is outgrowing population and inflation by a factor of about 2 to 1. So we see that things, generally speaking, are tracking in a troubling direction. And then, of course, our property tax is just about breaking people around these parts. I won't say who. He's a dear friend. But I had a gentleman pop into my office last week and basically asked me, James, I'm hearing that the city of Austin, Travis County, Austin ISD, and Central Health are all going to raise taxes this year to the tune of $1,000 if everything goes poorly in the November election. And when you tack that $1,000 onto the $9,000 already owed by the average Travis County resident, he said, I don't know if I can do it. And I said, well, I'm right there with you. That's why I escaped the city of Austin a long time ago. So, but just to put a finer point on that, we have the 6th highest effective property tax rate in the nation. Again, all of this to say that I think the local public finance landscape in Texas is in a difficult place. And of course, we have to ask why. Why are we in the shape that we're in? How did we get here? And what are some things that we can do to help get ourselves out of this situation? I'll be honest, I don't know the answers to those questions, so I'm very glad to be joined by some very talented people whose bios you have available in hard copy and who I will go through very quickly because I want to get to the meat of the discussion. But at the far end here, we have Chuck Marone, who is the founder and president of Strong Towns and best-selling author of...
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chuck. Thank you for joining us. He's been named one of the 15 most influential urbanists of all time, both in 2017 as well as 2023. And he has prior professional experience as a land use planner and civil engineer. So, Chuck, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks. It's very nice to be back in Austin. Thank you.
Good. Next to Chuck, we have the Honorable Kara Mendelson, who represents District 12 in the city of Dallas. Kara was elected to council in May of 2019, And she has served in many capacities. Very quickly, she has served as the chair of the Public Safety Committee, the chair of the Legislative Affairs Committee, the chair of the Ad Hoc Committee on General Investigating and Ethics, and perhaps most relevant to today's discussion, she is the former chair of the Government Performance and Financial Management Committee. Thank you for all that you do in the city of Dallas. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Happy to be here. And Chuck, I have your book.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
And then last but not least, we have the Honorable Mark White, who represents District 10 in the city of San Antonio. Mark was elected in May of 2023, and I was so very glad to have a moment of Mark's time at our latest Policy Summit event where I got to bore him with all sorts of crazy ideas about local public finance reform, but he knows quite a bit about city budgeting, and we're very glad to have him. Prior to his election, Mark was very active in the community, serving as the board chair of, serving on the board of the Northeast Neighborhood Alliance, the state of Texas's Public Transportation Advisory Committee as a Governor Abbott appointee, and the City of San Antonio's Ethics Review Board and Zoning Commission. Folks, if you would, help me thank these people for being here today and taking the time to be with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and there was nothing boring about our conversation at that conference.
Glad to hear. So where I want to jump in is to try and establish where we are in particular communities around in the state. And of course, where I think we ought to start is with city finances. We're right in the middle of budget season. Everybody is either in process of adopting or has already adopted their budgets and tax rates. So Councilmember Mendelson, we'll start with you, if you don't mind, just to kind of give us a brief update of where the city of Dallas is in the adoption process and how things are going.
Well, we're in the middle of the adoption process. Like most cities, we get a proposed budget. In our case, it's by our interim city manager because our former city manager is now the Austin city manager. And so we've all been reviewing that. We've had briefings, and we're getting to the point where we're going to start suggesting amendments to that budget. The budget is $4.97 billion. Our general fund is $1.9 billion. So it's a very large, it's a fairly complicated budget in some ways and pretty easy in others. There's a lot of moving parts when you talk about a city of that size. And so what does the landscape look like? I mean, you just spouted out some debt numbers. The city of Dallas has $7.5 billion in debt. We have more than $17 billion of deferred maintenance. And yet we continue to see items in our budget that are things like, let's give planter boxes, indoor tabletop planter boxes to residents to do urban farming. So I find some of those things objectionable. Not everybody loves when I talk about these things, but I think that there's a real case to be made in cities to focus on the role of cities and to fund those things first. And if there's money left that the taxpayers want the city to try to solve all the world's problems, we should do that. But first, we have some responsibilities to take care of the things that we are entrusted to handle. And I think there's improvement needed for most cities.
And I appreciate those comments. Just out of curiosity, because you've served on council now for several years, would you say during your tenure on council, things have been trending in a better direction or a little bit more difficult direction?
I think it's been a really interesting time to serve on council in the 5.5 years I've been there. When I started, the annual budget was $3.6 billion. As I just told you, it's now 4.9. That's a very short amount of time to have that kind of growth. So in that sense, I think it's problematic. I think you're coming up with a COVID question in a minute, but because COVID happened about 6 months, 8 months into my tenure, there was a lot of uncertainty. And then there was a floodgate of money that came in. And while we all anticipated some very difficult times for property appraisals and real estate and sales tax, that didn't really happen. We only had 1 year of any kind of decrease in our sales tax, and it was like 1.3%. So what we saw were some years with double digits, 11, 15% growth. We raised property taxes 7, 8, and more percent, while appraisals were skyrocketing. So the tax burden has been very significant for homeowners, but also for renters. And so the price of housing has skyrocketed in Dallas because there is no property homestead exemption if you have a apartment complex. And if we're going to raise your taxes 8% just on the city side, doesn't include what happened for schools or for the county. We also have a hospital district. Those are going to be passed on to the renters. And so then you have lots of conversations about, well, how do we need to supplement affordability? Well, maybe if you didn't raise the taxes so much, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. So are things trending in the right way? I mean, wait till I tell you that we've had over $900 million come in from COVID. So when you start absorbing that kind of money in addition to rising property values, increased tax rate, the rate has gone down, but the values have far exceeded the reduction in the rate. So the revenue from property taxes has just been astronomical, and new dollars that have been added on for real estate developed. You're just talking about a huge infusion of money, and I'm not saying that some of that money has not been put to good use, because some of it has, but there's probably a lot of things that we could have solved with that money that we didn't.
Councilmember White, I'd love to jump to you. I know based on some of my preparation for today's event, I got an opportunity to watch you put up some very excellent fights in budget committee. I would love to hear your perspective on how things are moving in the city of San Antonio, and whether you're optimistic or maybe a little bit more pessimistic about where things are headed.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good, and again, thank you for having me. And this is such an important discussion, right? Because what's going on in our cities, I think, is probably going on in a lot of other cities around the state. We have a $1.7 billion general fund, and then total budget is up, getting close to $4 billion. And I'm going to give you a quick anecdote from 2 weeks ago that I think really highlights what the problem is. And I'm sure, I hope we talk about today, our zero-based budgeting initiative, which we were very grateful to pass. But in that final debate before the governance committee a couple of Fridays ago, the mayor, who of course is not a fan of zero-based budgeting, was pushing back, and he's squirming, and he's making all of his arguments. And right at the end, there was a moment where he stated on the record, and you can go find the clip of it. He said, our priorities here in San Antonio, in other words, what we're spending money on, are not required by our charter or state or federal law. Right there on the record. And that right there really encapsulates to me what our problem is. To me, as a municipal government, right, we should be spending on roads, we should be spending on public safety, we should be cleaning up these homeless encampments that are popping up all over. We need to be spending our money on core city services that make our citizens' day-to-day quality of life better. And what the mayor said that day, and I guess it was really an honest moment from our mayor, is that we don't do that. Our council's priorities are so often not what our citizens care about. It's not about basic municipal government. And so when I look at what we're doing right now in the 2025 budget, there's still all sorts of spending in there on things that, frankly, we do a budget survey every year, right? Where we ask the citizens, maybe Dallas does it too, and what are your priorities, right? And then, I don't know why we do it, because we ask them, and then we go off and spend money on other things. And yesterday we were actually having an argument about $150,000 from our general fund budget this year that our city wants to put towards providing free lawyers for non-citizens of the United States. and it's through a group called American Gateways, and the managing director of American Gateways has stated that a lot of these folks that are receiving these legal services are folks that have come across the border, come through the city's Migrant Resource Center. And now we as a city are spending our general fund money to provide them with lawyers. Just one example, right? There's others, of course, but it's these kind of issues that we have to highlight, I think, and be loud about, and take the heat on like we did yesterday. You know, oh, Mark, you're not compassionate, this, that, and the other. No. This is a spending conversation, right? As we're going to talk about today, you know, we're looking at a $10 million budget deficit over the next 2 years. We just had a fire negotiation where we struggled to come up with the money to pay our firefighters, the folks that run into burning buildings for us, and we couldn't find the money, you know, for months on end. And why? It's because we spend on all of these other things. And we can go down the list, you know, $500,000 for a reproductive justice program, right, where we send women out of state to go and have abortion services. We just gave money to a museum in Mexico, right? It's like, what are we doing when in San Antonio, 22% of our roads are either in poor or failing condition, right? The homeless encampments that are everywhere that we can't clean up fast enough. So at the end of the day, what's the solution? Well, we should start with requiring ourselves to focus on what a municipal government should be focused on.
And I think I know the answer to this, but I'd love to hear you confirm it. For all of those perplexing programs, like the legal services for non-citizens that are funded out of the general fund, where does the money for the general fund come from primarily?
The money for a general fund is primarily going to come from property taxes, sales tax, and other kinds of franchise taxes. So when AT&T is burying cable in your right-of-way, things like that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to help folks make that connection that the money we pay to property tax is going to fund all sorts of things that we may or may not agree with.
What I loved about what you said is specifically about how it's spoken about and how people can sometimes be attacked for talking about core values that, frankly, our residents want. Haven't heard a resident say, no, don't pave my street, especially when it's a failing street and, you know, asphalt's being kicked up every time I drive on it, or a sidewalk that is dangerous to walk on, or a park that has an outdated playground that the children are playing on. Like, these are the things that should be no-brainer. It shouldn't even be a consideration that, of course, my city takes care of these things, but instead it is. And I think there's hundreds of programs that we could talk about that are examples of things that it's like, why are we doing this? And, you know, I'll give you this one. We fund a program that helps people untangle the title to the home that they live in. So very often people will inherit a house. There's no will, there's nothing. Somebody just, the child just lives there. Then maybe that child passes on and now nieces and nephews or other children live there. Somebody owned that house. But as our property taxes have increased, at the beginning, they didn't have to pay anything, right? Because they were below the exemption level for the homestead. Well, as our taxes have gone up, somebody now has to pay a bill, except the grandchild of the owner or the nephew or his friend says, well, I'm not paying property taxes. This isn't my house. I'm not responsible for it. And it might be a very modest bill. And eventually, the county is going to foreclose on them. They're going to take that asset away. They're going to ask the city to sell it. We're going to sell it for $1,000, and it's going to get redeveloped. And what we've actually done is harm people because we've taken away their generational wealth. They probably could have sold this for a huge amount of money, even if they couldn't have afforded to stay there. So the city decided, okay, we're going to fund a program to help untangle these titles and help people do it. What happened? We hired a contractor. They held seminars. But how many titles got untangled? Not even one. Not even one. We accepted a lead-based improvement plan. We spent every dollar that was allocated by the federal government for administration, didn't solve a single house. Then they came back and said, let's change this to be rental properties as well. And I'm like, wait, so you're saying I can own a rental property that's got lead paint and you're gonna pay to fix it and then I'm gonna charge more for rent? Sounds great. I still don't think we've done any work on it. So then it said, okay, let's do it for multifamily. At the end of the day, we do need to get the lead out of people's lives, right? If you've got lead dust on a windowsill and you've got developing children, we have to take care of that. Like, this is the entire future and lifespan of that family. But the administration of some of the government programs is what's really, really problematic. And the focus of what happens is everybody wants a victory. I brought this to the city. I'm responsible for championing this shiny object. And that's how the real ingredients get put into these budgets, is that I want to have been this champion and I get the city manager to put it in, and then I'm going to get my buddies so that we can make sure that this happens so I can run on re-election for this.
Chuck, let me rope you in here. I know you have much more of a kind of a macro level view, and Strong Towns is founded upon the principle of fiscal sustainability. So be curious to hear your thoughts about what you're seeing on kind of a more of a macro level.
Well, I'm the Minnesotan, so I'm supposed to be the maybe kinder, gentler one on the stage than a bunch of Texans, but I may be the opposite here for a bit. Because I'm listening to the budget conversations and I'm hearing things that I hear everywhere, right? Like everyone's talking about this. I think it's important to recognize that cities have cash budgets. It's literally like the money you have coming in this year and the money you have going out this year. I don't know what you do for a living. I don't know what you two did prior to being in government, but in the private sector, we run our budgets in vastly different ways, right? We have a balance sheet. We have to note our long-term obligations, our long-term promises. These are things that are foreign to the way cities operate. And it's fascinating to me because when we talk to people who are in the private sector who don't understand how government works, they often assume that the way you budget and the way you do things in government is very much like the way you do things with a private business, and it's not even close. In a most absurd kind of way, because we have cash budgets, because we don't recognize long-term liabilities, if I need $1,000 this year in my budget, and I'm willing to go to you and say, hey, give me $1,000 this year, I'll give you $10,000 next year. On our city budget, that would show up as plus 1,000. It wouldn't show up as plus 1,000 minus 10,000. That minus 10,000 is just like gone. It won't appear until next year, and next year someone will have to deal with it. When we do things like build a road, building a road, often we can get a developer to do that, we can get a grant to do that, we can borrow money to do that, and then we get a whole bunch of new tax base along with it. We get all the new homes, all the new businesses, all of those things start paying revenue to us right away. That road is a long-term liability. 25 years from now, we're going to have to come back and fix that road. That liability does not show up anywhere on any balance sheet, on any budget, nowhere. But all of the cash that you get from the new tax base shows up today. When I look at Texas, and I'll pause here and then you guys can yell at me. I've been saying for for 15 years now, because I've been coming here, having talks with people and having conversations with people. Texas today feels to me like California 30 years ago. You're just behind them. And if you look at California, what California experienced in the 50s, 60s, 70s was a massive amount of growth. Huge numbers of people moving to the state, all this, building of new roads, building of new subdivisions, building of this. And it gave them, from a municipal budget standpoint, massive amounts of cash, massive amounts of, prosperity, massive amounts of capacity to do things. But since then, all of those liabilities have come due. All of those liabilities have started to show up on the city balance sheet. they started to become, from the balance sheet onto the budget. All of a sudden you have to fix all these roads. You have to take care of all this stuff. You have to maintain things. And what you see in California is that taxes have climbed dramatically. Municipal debt has climbed even more dramatically. And the backlog of liabilities of like unfunded, like we have to fix this pipe, but we don't have the money to do it. We have to fix this road, but we don't have the money to do it. That list of backlog have grown dramatically. I think that you will know you have reached California status when someone proposes the version of Prop 13 for your state, where you freeze property taxes as like a reaction to having literally insolvent cities across the board. That's kind of the next step.
So the thing I would totally agree with you about is that we don't budget for sustainability. And so I think every time we put in a playground, we have to immediately start saying, okay, we expect a lifespan of this time and we need to start accruing for replacement. And that's for same thing for roads and maintenance, and we don't do that.
And let's say fiscal sustainability, because the word sustainability has been wrapped up in like a whole bunch of things. We don't budget for fiscal sustainability. And let me take you off the hook a little bit for this. This is the accepted accounting practices. This is actually like the rules as they're set up, as they're given to cities. Here's how you should budget. And it doesn't have a fiscal sustainability component to it.
Correct. And same thing for nonprofits. It's the same accounting. And so I 100% agree. I think that our council has actually become more aware of that. And I think those questions are asked more. We ask about, well, what would it cost to actually get all of our sidewalks into a good state of repair? $2 billion for sidewalks. I mean, I think that's crazy. But not that I don't think we need to have sidewalks. We do. But how could we have gotten so far behind? You know, you come to downtown Dallas and the streets are so bad, but we didn't prioritize downtown Dallas. Why? I mean, every business that's looking to move wants to come see downtown, even if they don't think they're going to end up there. They want to come see downtown Dallas. It's gorgeous. It's an exciting place to be. We're a very business-friendly city. There's a lot of good reasons to pick Dallas. But if you start driving around, you say, I don't want to be on these roads. But we also are budgeting for equity. And downtown Dallas is the whitest part of our entire city. So it didn't get the funding it needed. I don't even understand that. So
let me ask a silly question. So the LBB, the Legislative Budget Board, suggests that the state of Texas has received about $85.5 billion in pandemic aid. That's a lot of money. So how is it that we received all of this pandemic aid, and yet we still have the infrastructure challenges that we do?
Well, guess it goes to what were we spending our aid on? And look, our city did a lot of cities spent money on what will be recurring costs, and the money's going to dry up, and then what are they going to do? And they may be in a really tough financial situation. Our city thankfully didn't do that as much, but what we did do is we didn't spend money on infrastructure, right? We spent money, for example, let's just take yesterday again. We had our briefing on homeless services, right? We are spending over $60 million this year on homeless services, right? And listen, I want to take care of these folks too. These encampments need to be cleaned up. We're doing our best to clean them up. But for the past few years, we've bought hotels. You know, we've done all of these things with this ARPA money to try to attack this problem. And anybody that tells you the homeless problem is getting better in San Antonio is just flat out lying. And so, again, the very basic answer to your question is, well, we didn't spend money on the infrastructure. In San Antonio, I think the number is almost $400 million that we got in ARPA funds. And again, to your point, you know, spend it based on equity, spend it on affordable housing, spend it on the homeless issues. And so, again, I would say that we're going to do better when we start focusing on the core issues of the city, and we didn't do it with the ARPA funding for the most part.
So $940 million is how much we got all together from more than 40 sources for COVID pandemic relief. Now, 40 million of that was for airports. We have both DFW and Love Field and Executive Airport. And the airports were heavily impacted, obviously. There were immediate needs, absolutely appropriate to spend money on. We housed a lot of homeless in hotels at that time, lots of rapid and other subsidy programs for housing for people who genuinely lost their jobs. And this was necessary and important. I'm proud of the city for having focused on many of those initiatives. So I think those are some of the good. Other good things that we did invest in include getting water service to some of our underserved communities. So I know the city will make the case that this is pandemic related. They have never had water service. The pandemic didn't cause that. But we did suddenly have some money to be able to take care of that, and I'm glad we did.
Yeah, no, I don't want to interrupt.
Okay. There's some other things though. So like I'll give you an example of the bad. For some reason, we used ARPA funding for street striping. Street striping is bread and butter, right? Like we've got to make sure there's the lines in our lanes and our crosswalks. This is how we make sure people aren't killed. People can walk in our neighborhood safely. And why would we, devote a couple $1 million to that? This should be regular budget. Now that that money is gone away, guess what? We're using money that we got as a return from our transit agency on sales tax. Again, this should be part of our regular budget. Always have that in there. But this item's floating around. At some point, we're going to have to budget. And again, we're only talking about $3 or $4 million, again, out of a $4.9 billion budget. So those are some examples of the good and the bad. And then I'll say the redeemable one. There was an item that our city manager had put forward to put more than $40 million into a broadband initiative. Except it wasn't actually going to connect to anybody. It was going to put fiber where fiber already exists. It's just that the city would own the fiber instead of the current providers. And luckily, enough council members got together and went, what are you talking about? So they did lots of briefings for us so that, us boomers could understand what they're talking about, except we already did understand what they were talking about. And it's like, but why would we do that? And I think the real goal was to long-term reduce costs, right? We're sending a lot of images over fiber for, cameras from police. Cameras are on our animal services folks now when they're especially dealing with dangerous dogs. Code compliance is wearing that. There's a lot of traffic, and we're paying for that, and our budget's increased significantly in that way. But that's not really a good use of funds. So we all got together and managed to redirect that money. So the city did come up with a way to follow the rules, but make the rules work for them. So we reimbursed ourselves for a lot of overtime for our police and fire officers, and then moved that money that we would have already allocated and frankly already paid into a multi-use fund that we can hopefully use for some positive initiatives. There's some crazy things that we spent money on. I know, James, I may have told you this one. We literally took alleys, made them into trails. These were problematic alleys, meaning they were in disrepair, but also they were in high crime areas and bad things were happening in the alleys. So now you've got bad things happening on a trail behind people's house who weren't asked if they wanted this. It wasn't lit, and they didn't connect. Meaning, it's not like you could now suddenly walk a whole bunch of alleys in a path. No, it was this little alley here and that alley there and this alley there. So not really sure what the point of that was, but yeah, we went forward with that program too.
Chuck, is this resonating at all with your perspective?
Yeah. I mean, so the COVID stuff is interesting because to me, it's just another in like a line of cash drops into cities. And again, when you drop cash into kind of a dysfunctional system, you get dysfunctional results at the end of the day. I mean, if you remember back to the Obama administration, it was shovel-ready projects. That was the thing. In 2009, if you had a shovel-ready project, and what is a shovel-ready project? It's a project that you brought to the point of having to fund, realized it wasn't worth the money you would spend on it, and so you put it on a shelf. And then all of a sudden, we can spend someone else's money on it, so now it becomes a good project. We have a long, long line of this. And let me kind of, I think in a big picture sense, explain what I see going on. At the end of World War II, the economists at the time, around FDR, ultimately around President Truman and then President Eisenhower, were very concerned that the economy was going to slide right back into the Great Depression. When we demobilized millions of troops, when we shut down all these industries, there was nothing really different about our economy in 1945 than there would have been in 1935. What we did instead is we went out and invested in this new version of America. We started to build highways. We started to build frontage roads. We started to build subdivisions. We ultimately started to build kind of all the accoutrements of development that we're very, familiar with today. From Austin to San Antonio is practically like one big frontage road that we've now developed along the whole way. Each iteration of that creates something that the federal government really, really values, and that is short-term growth. It creates jobs. It creates economic development. It creates transactions in the economy. And when you measure success in terms of gross domestic product, every time you invest in infrastructure, bam, gross domestic product goes up. It's great. The economists will talk about the multiplier effect. It's wonderful. It's very, very different if you are a municipality. If you are a city, each of those transactions represents growth. Yes, we get a new subdivision. We get a new In-N-Out Burger. We get a new Walmart. Like all these things represent something positive in terms of your cash flow and your current budget. But what it also represents, that it does not represent for the federal government and does not represent for the state government, is a long-term liability. We as cities take on these liabilities that we will provide the police and fire protection to that subdivision way out in the middle of nowhere, that we will provide water service and sewer service for all these places out here, that we will take care of the drainage and fix the roads and $2 billion for sidewalks. This is what adds up over and over and over again. And when you see us struggling to fund police, struggling to fund fire departments, we have arranged ourselves on the landscape in a way that for cities is a really, really high fiscal burn rate. It's an intense burn rate. And you see now the liabilities coming due. For the federal government, they don't have to maintain your cul-de-sac. The state government doesn't have to pay for your sidewalks. You have to pay for that as a city. Those are on your budget. You have to do that. And we don't have to pay for the sidewalks today. We have to pay for the sidewalks they built 30 years ago. And all that growth over the last 30 years, because of all that stuff being there, is now spent on other things. It's committed to other things. And what we find is we don't have the money to fix the stuff right in front of us. And so it makes city council members look incompetent. Why are you not doing this? Why are you not doing that? And it's because your balance sheet is vastly upside down. The federal government benefits from having us build infrastructure and take on liabilities. The state government benefits from having us build new subdivisions and take on the liabilities. We benefit in the short term from it, but long term, we can't avoid the liabilities. We don't get to print our own money. We don't get to pretend these liabilities aren't there. We don't get to ignore them. When we ignore them, things go bad. And really, I think the story that we're trying to tell is exactly that. In COVID, we saw cities do a lot of really dumb things. But were they dumber things than what we've been doing the last, 7 decades? Not really. It was just like a spurt of dumb instead of a drip of dumb, right? Does that make sense?
It does. In fact,
Yeah.
in the economics literature, academics describe a phenomenon known as the flypaper effect.
Okay.
And what it describes is a situation wherein the federal government awards grants to a subnational government, And that grant money tends to stick around in the form of future expenses because people get accustomed to the services that have been provided through that grant money. And so one of my great concerns about all of the COVID aid is that our government officials are going to grow comfortable with all of the programs and services that have been created and want to continue those in some fashion, which of course is going to put upward pressure on property taxes.
So I think you have a great point. I do want to tell you, here's your silver lining. So SB 2 limits governments to raising 3.5% on reappraisals for property taxes. Many cities like Dallas, this is our first budget where we actually have to follow SB 2. Because of that, there are programs, which I know I have complained to you about. So for instance, the city of Dallas was running its own senior ride program, although we spent $430 million last year with our transit agency, but we still had our own senior ride program. Well, this year, since we have to follow it, guess what? We finally gave that program back to the transit agency. I've only been complaining about it for 5 years. Now I know how many years it takes of complaining to get something done, just so you know. Another one is in Dallas, we gave away our health authority to the county, but we were running a senior dental program. Dental care is important for seniors. It doesn't mean the city should be running it. But this year, because of SB 2, the city went, we need to give that program back over to the county. And I'm like, you think? Good, 5 years, it finally got in there. So this will be my first budget year not complaining about those two programs. Everyone's kind of happy about that. Another miss I just want to mention with COVID that I know you especially will love is in Dallas, more than 40% of our traffic signals are older than me. I'm 57. If you don't know how long a traffic signal should last, that might not be meaningful. Yeah. It's about 25 years. Yeah. So traffic signals are double the age they ought to be, and here we had all that money and we didn't take care of it. And so to me, that's a miss where we could have really upgraded that infrastructure, which also means saving lives, very important, also means less first responders going out. So it would have lowered that cost as well. Possibly could have made air quality better. Lots of different benefits that would have happened. The one question you had asked about the budget that I didn't say that's new this year are some fees. So when you're talking about SB 2 and now we're limited on growing the property tax revenue for reappraisals, well, how do you get more revenue? You don't do it through property tax. You just start adding in fees. So we have a proposal from our interim city manager for $3 a month for every residential customer, meaning not any of the apartments, not any of the commercial. $3 a month, so $36, and this is going to go to cover things that have previously been paid for by the general fund. So dead animals in the road being picked up, litter control, homeless encampment cleanup. There's one or two other things that are included in that. These were all services that were paid for by the general fund previously. So I think this is very problematic. It's on top of, you were talking about other fees and increases. This is on top of increases in their water bill, in their sanitation bill, and you start layering these things on, and this is real money for people.
This isn't any sort of groundbreaking answer here, but at the end of the day, it's about council priorities. I mean, that's it. It's just in our case, what do our 10 council members plus the mayor want to spend our money on? And the way things line up in San Antonio right now, it's on all these other issues that stray away from, again, what we should be doing, the public safety, the infrastructure, et cetera. And majority rules, right? You need 6 votes. So even though we've been successful over this past year in getting things done and climbing to that 6-vote threshold on a lot of things, when it comes down to all this big money spending, the majority of this council leans the other way, and they're going to keep spending on all these programs that, in my opinion, just don't benefit our our day-to-day citizens. It's not what we're supposed to be doing. So number one, it's council priorities, and then on the other side of it, at the very basic level, is the frivolous spending.
Let me ask you on council priorities, because I know you have a brand new initiative that I think is going to help clarify what council priorities ought to be. Can you tell us a little bit about that particular initiative?
Sure. We're pretty proud of it because we introduced a zero-based budgeting initiative earlier this year. And let me give credit to my team who's sitting right here in the second row, because when we put this forward, everybody in the community, the business community, Mark, we love this idea. Do it. Start from scratch. And then but good luck getting it through this city council, right? But we went door to door and we explained it to all the other council members. And again, 2 Fridays ago, we got it through governance committee 5-0. And starting next year, we are going to get a plan in April of next year to change our budgeting practices in San Antonio. It's going to be a hybrid of zero-based budgeting and then 2 offshoots of zero-based budgeting, outcomes-based and priority-based budgeting. And included is going to be some funding, which is very important, for an outside consultant to come into the city, help us structure this new budgeting process, and then help us through it. And then the 2027 budget should be our first, zero-based budget, hybrid budget that we do, and then from there we'll see where we go. So it took a lot of work. We got it done, and people say, "Well, how'd you make that happen?" Well, at the end of the day, it's really common sense, right? Let's not spend on programs that are outdated. Let's not spend on programs where we have no metrics to determine if they're actually working. Let's not have redundant spending, right? So what we're going to do with this new budgeting method is department by department, sort of strip it down and ask the department, okay, you got to come before council and say, what do you need to spend in order to reach this outcome at the end of the year? If it's homeless encampment cleanups, right? Okay, you're telling us you're going to clean up 1,000 encampments this year. What expenses do we have to incur in order to get there? And I think when we do that, we're going to find out that, again, we're spending redundantly, in between departments, and I think we're going to really analyze what expenses do we need to incur. And so I'm excited about it. It's something that my colleagues are pretty nervous about, I'll be honest with you, because they're like, Mark, you just want to cut out, that reproductive justice program. That's the reason you want it. And this new budgeting method won't necessarily target specific programs, right? It's just going to ask, what are the expenses that are actually needed to make that program work as we want it to. And so we'll see what happens.
That sounds terrific. Chuck, I know you're going to jump in real quick, and then we're going to go to audience Q&A.
Super quick. SB2 sounds a little bit like California's Prop 13 light. That's what it sounds like. I'm not totally familiar with it, but the way you describe it, it sounds like a light version of that. I think it's important to note that 57-year-old streetlights, I've gotten to be 57 years old instead of being replaced at 25 years old, not because we don't know that they last 25 years, but because that we don't care enough to actually account for that. If we had accrual accounting instead of cash accounting, you would actually have an impetus, like a financial impetus, to document, all right, we have this expense coming up. It's 10 years from now. We got to put some money aside. Oh, we got to expect it's 5 years from now. Oh, now it's next year, and we've got the money set aside. We're actually accounting for that. We're accruing that liability, and we know that it's coming up. Right now, we can just ignore those things. And so 25 years turns to 30 years, turns to 35 years, turns to 40 years, turns to 57 years, like that, because it doesn't, none of our infrastructure just falls apart overnight. It declines and degrades, and we can put it off, we can put it off, we can put it off, because we've got other things, other priorities. This is endemic within the way we actually account for public liabilities. And it's not your responsibility. It's not your responsibility to know you've got 57-year-old streetlights. That is actually what technical staff is supposed to be doing. But all of it can kind of be hidden because there's no mechanism to bring it to the fore.
But here's the thing, we do know.
Well, you know now.
And not only do, no, I've known for 5.5 years on council. We have a matrix, and it's not that we have 57-year-old traffic signals, it's that more than 40% are older than 57. Yeah. I don't even want to know how old they really are. So we do know that, and the council consciously is making the decision to not fund it and to fund other programs, because if I go in front of my town hall, which I'm going to have tonight, and I go, hey, we funded 3 traffic signals. Well, actually, my district, we do talk about traffic signals a lot. But, people are going to be like, yeah, okay, whatever. But what if I say, hey, we're getting a new park? All right, let's hear about it. But to your point, that park's going to need to be mowed. What about trees, watering? What about safety? Like, it becomes an ongoing maintenance and operation expense, and at some point will need to be replaced. At least, some of the infrastructure in there, and we don't ever account for that, and we don't even think about it as we add those items. So I do think this is an important conversation, and it's definitely a place where we align. We have tried to move towards the zero-based budgeting. I will say the politics of it are different in Dallas. Our last budget passed 10-5. So 5 voted against it, including me and the mayor. So not unlike you, there's some divides on focusing on what we believe are the necessary elements of a government budget. But the politics of it is that when the staff came to the council, the depth of the presentation was not sufficient to do that work. Last season, I put forward a budget amendment to put consultant dollars in there to go through our budget and help us identify efficiencies. The council actually was not interested in that.
Let me give you my final duh answer. Comes back to elections. We want to change this stuff. We want to change council priorities. We want to change the frivolous spending. We got to win city elections, right? And in San Antonio, there's really, out of the 10 seats, 11 if you include the mayor's office, there's really only 2 where we can say, okay, we're going to get somebody in there with some fiscal responsibility. And so, again, that's where we really got to change things.
Great points all. We probably have time for a question or two. Yes, sir. Gentleman in the back.
What sort of efforts have been made to have an external audit in Dallas and San Antonio? I know we've tried to have it here. Mayor Adler and the rest of them pushed back saying, oh, we have an internal audit. We already do this. We don't need this. The reason I ask, when I was a policy advisor at City Hall, we had $50 million in COVID overspend that we needed to reconcile. So I asked the Financial Services Department, contracts, purchase orders, agreements, invoices, send it over, because I have a finance background. I know how to read this stuff. It was absolutely frivolous spending in there. There's no way there wasn't some fraud. So what sort of efforts are being put forward?
Yeah, I'll be quick. Council never go for it in San Antonio. In fact, when we had the zero-based budgeting conversation, the initial meeting, and I'll never forget it, when our city manager, came up to our conference room and we met on it, and he's like, "What do you want out of this, Mark?" And I said, "I want us to spend our money better, Eric." And we talked about how we were going to do it, and we talked about a third-party consultant just coming in for this. No way, absolutely not. So, we do have, of course, our internal auditor, and they think that that's sufficient. So it would never fly having some external auditor. It took us some work over these past few months to where we finally got an agreement that if we really are going to set up a new budgeting process, we have to have somebody come in from the outside at least to help us structure, what this process is going to look like. But in terms of an external auditor coming in, I can't see it happening.
Very specific to your COVID and ARPA funds, we actually do have a consultant who is actually meant to make sure that all those expenses get pushed through legally and are documented sufficiently. But in terms of doing it for the overall budget, we tried to put that money in there to even just hit our biggest departments. So the police department, fire department, maybe code compliance. and really look at how can we make it more efficient. Our sanitation expenses have gone through the roof. It's our number one complaint in 311. You know, TC Rodnux and I have had this conversation many times. He would want to add people to 311. I'd say, well, why are you doing that? And he goes, don't you want people to answer the phone when your residents call? And I'm like, no, I want you to fix the things that they're already calling about so less people call. So if you fix sanitation, a third of those calls go away. And I think we can do better. And so some of it is just basic management. But there are complex systems, especially in things like the police department, where, you know, just changing the practices could greatly reduce the expenses and allow people to focus more time on the activities we need them to.
There's no city with there's no corporation with a $5 million annual revenue that doesn't have an outside audit.
We have outside auditors, but it's looking for compliance, not looking for efficiency.
Right, right.
We have a question here.
Yes, sir.
I was just wondering what y'all's thoughts would be about the state passing a law that cities and counties have to pass a core budget first that could only cover police and fire, roads, and the actual administration of the city. And that has to pass before any other items can be added, because I see it as a way then the citizens would be able to tell what's being spent on what. Because when you get a 1,000-page city budget, how can you analyze it? So what do y'all think about that idea?
Yeah, a charter amendment. And this is something, I'll tell you, that's floating around right now. Let's get it in the charter as to what city spending really is and what we have to spend on before we spend on some of this other stuff. I love the idea.
So I'm a strong believer in local control. I see my residents everywhere. I know exactly what's happening in my district. We don't want to have residents have to go to their representatives that are barely ever in session. So I do believe in local control. I believe in good local control. Your answer fits, right? You want to talk about a charter amendment for your city to set priorities. That's a great way to do it. There's lots of ways to do it, including the suggestion of you need to be very careful about who you're electing. The truth is, not a lot of people are participating in municipal elections. If they do, it's, I've already known you, you came to my door, you have name recognition, but do you really know how that person's voting? We have people who are sitting on city council, and the way people think they vote and the way they actually vote are two completely different things. Even the media is not covering the actual core of our business and the narratives of things in terms that are frankly just very social oriented as opposed to fiscally oriented or outcome based, are what's talked about. Oh, she said this and my feelings are hurt. But what she said was a fact. So don't be hurt by facts. Let's act on facts. And yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Because there's a guy on our city council named John Courage. Everybody thinks he's a conservative just because of his name, right? You take a look at his voting record, definitely not. Also want to give a shout out to...
Good branding.
Right? Yeah. Great name. Dustin Burrows, right? In HB 2127, right? Have to give him a shout out right here, right? Because that bill, to me, is a great bill, right? Hey, cities, you focus on the city stuff. Let us handle the state stuff up here.
Chuck, what do you think about the legislature being a bit more prescriptive in what cities can and should be doing?
I think legislators need to give cities a huge toolbox. Way more capacity, way more ability. I think particularly here in Texas, the state is a bit paternalistic and micromanaging of cities, even more so than other states, quite frankly. And I think that needs to all go away. The one thing that I would say is that I do think that cities should have a statutory limit on how much debt they can take on, because the market will lend you more money than what is good for you. And debt is the one way that local governments can hide a lot of what they're doing and keep their current budget looking good, and have it really be a drag long term. And so to me, cities should have a debt limit. They shouldn't be able to spend more than 3 to 5% of their budget on debt service. They should have a limit on the total amount they can borrow and the length of term that they can borrow at. And to me, that would be a check on opening up the rest of the toolbox and letting cities figure it out. Because quite frankly, the economy of San Antonio is different than the economy of Dallas. The idea that you have the same exact tax code and tax structure and are forced to run your cities in the same way just is nonsensical. Houston is a very different city. A lot of your small towns are very different economies. They should be able to structure their own things locally with a lot more flexibility.
James, SB2 is forcing cities to incur more debt, right? Since we can't raise the revenue on the general fund and operations side, you just take out more debt. And debt service is not included in this limitation. So I think the problem they were trying to solve for, which I don't agree with, because I really think it's up to the city to decide and the taxpayers to elect people who will make decisions that reflect their wishes, but they actually caused a different problem.
Well, we'll have to put a pin in it there. Please help me thank this great group for taking time today to share with us. I really appreciate it. All right. Thanks, everyone.